United States, 2024. Part 1. A Heart of Compassion. The sun filtered weakly through the blinds of the small clinic, casting soft stripes of light across the worn linoleum floor. The clinic itself was unassuming, nestled between a busy corner deli and a faded laundromat, its modest exterior blending into the bustling neighborhood. The sign above the door simply read, Community Health Clinic, and it had become a beacon for those who had nowhere else to turn. Inside, the clinic was a hive of activity. The waiting room was modest, with a few rows of plastic chairs, each one occupied by someone in need of care. The walls, once a cheerful yellow, had faded over the years, and the posters promoting healthy living were curling at the edges. Yet, despite its humble appearance, the clinic was filled with a sense of warmth, a testament to the woman who ran it. Dr. Isabelle Cartwright moved through the clinic with a quiet grace, her presence calming even the most anxious of patients. She was a woman in her mid-30s, with kind eyes that spoke of a deep well of empathy and a smile that put everyone at ease. Her dark hair was usually tied back in a loose bun, and she wore the same simple white coat every day, its pockets filled with notes, pins, and the occasional lollipop for a nervous child. Isabelle had dedicated her life to medicine, but her approach was different from many of her peers. She saw each patient not as a case to be solved, but as a person to be cared for, body and soul. She listened as much as she examined, her soft voice inviting people to share their fears and their struggles. To Isabelle, healing was as much about listening as it was about prescribing treatments. The clinic was always busy, but Isabelle never seemed rushed. She would take her time with each patient, whether it was a child with a fever, an elderly woman with aching joints, or a man struggling with chronic pain. Her days were long, filled with a steady stream of people who needed her help, but she never turned anyone away. Even when the waiting room was full, she made sure each person felt seen and heard. Isabelle's compassion extended beyond the walls of the clinic. She had a reputation in the community for her kindness, especially toward those who couldn't afford to pay. It wasn't uncommon for her to waive fees, to offer treatments on credit, or to simply treat people for free. She had grown up in a family that didn't have much, and she knew what it was like to struggle. This background gave her a deep understanding of her patients' challenges, and she was determined to help them, regardless of their financial situation. This selflessness, however, did not go unnoticed by her employer, Dr. Malcolm Grant. Dr. Grant was a man who valued profits above all else. He had founded the clinic with the sole purpose of making money, and while the clinic served a vital role in the community, to him, it was just a business. He was a tall, imposing figure, always impeccably dressed in expensive suits that seemed out of place in the modest clinic. His sharp features and cold, calculating eyes made it clear that his interest in the clinic was purely financial. Dr. Grant had noticed Isabelle's habit of providing free care and saw it as a threat to his bottom line. To him, every free consultation, every waived fee, was money lost. He had invested heavily in the clinic, expecting a significant return, and Isabelle's compassion was, in his eyes, bad for business. He had tried to talk to her about it, but she had politely refused to change her ways. She explained that her work was about more than money, that it was about helping people, but Dr. Grant had little patience for such sentiments. As the months passed, the tension between them grew. Isabelle continued to do her work with the same dedication and kindness, but she could feel Dr. Grant's disapproval like a dark cloud hovering over her. He began to make subtle changes, cutting her hours, delaying her paychecks, assigning her the most difficult cases, hoping to wear her down. But Isabelle, though weary, remained steadfast. She continued to care for her patients, her faith in God giving her the strength to carry on. One of Isabelle's most frequent patients was Mrs. Ramirez, an elderly woman who lived alone in a small apartment nearby. Mrs. Ramirez had lived a hard life, her body now frail and bent with age, her hands gnarled from years of labor. She came to the clinic regularly, not just for her aches and pains, but also for the company. Isabelle would always make time for her, listening to stories of her youth, of her late husband, and of the children she rarely saw. For Mrs. Ramirez, these visits were a lifeline, a rare moment of connection in an otherwise lonely existence. One day, as Isabelle was examining Mrs. Ramirez's swollen ankles, Dr. Grant entered the room, his face a mask of irritation. "Isabelle," he said sharply, "a word, please." Isabelle glanced at Mrs. Ramirez, who gave her a knowing look. "Go on, dear," she said with a smile. "I'm not going anywhere." Isabelle followed Dr. Grant into his office, where he closed the door behind them. The room was as cold and impersonal as the man himself, neat, sterile, with nothing out of place. Dr. Grant sat behind his desk, his fingers steepled as he looked at her with thinly veiled disdain. "Dr. Cartwright," he began, his tone clipped, "I've noticed that you've been waiving fees for several of your patients. This is a business, not a charity. We have overhead costs, salaries, supplies. If we don't charge our patients, how do you expect this clinic to survive?" Isabelle took a deep breath, her hands clasped in front of her. She had anticipated this confrontation, but that didn't make it any easier. "Dr. Grant," she replied calmly, "I understand the importance of running a business, but many of our patients can barely afford to eat, let alone pay for medical care. They need our help, and if I can offer them that help, I feel it's my duty to do so." Dr. Grant's eyes narrowed. "Duty?" he echoed, his voice dripping with disdain. "Your duty is to this clinic and to ensuring its profitability. If you continue to undermine that, you won't have a job here for much longer." Isabelle's heart sank, but she refused to let fear show on her face. "My duty," she said quietly, "is to my patients. And as a Christian, I believe it's also my duty to help those in need, regardless of their ability to pay." Dr. Grant leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. "If you're so determined to play the saint, perhaps you should find another place to do it. This clinic needs to be profitable to stay open, and if you can't understand that, you're not suited to work here." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Isabelle felt a knot form in her stomach. She knew that Dr. Grant was serious, and she knew what was at stake. Not just her job, but the patients who depended on her. But she also knew that she couldn't compromise her principles, no matter the cost. "Dr. Grant," she said softly, "I love this clinic and I love the people we serve, but I cannot, in good conscience, turn away those who need our help simply because they can't afford to pay. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this work, but I can't abandon my principles." Dr. Grant's eyes flashed with anger. "Then you leave me no choice, Dr. Cartwright. Consider this your last day. You're fired." The words hit Isabelle like a physical blow. Fired. The reality of it sank in slowly, like a stone sinking to the bottom of a pond. She had lost her job, her livelihood, and the place where she had poured her heart and soul for years. She wanted to argue, to plead her case, but she knew it would be futile. Dr. Grant had made up his mind, and nothing she could say would change it. With a heavy heart, Isabelle nodded. "Very well," she said quietly. "I'll collect my things." She turned and left the office, her mind swirling with a mixture of emotions: shock, sadness, fear for the future. But as she walked back through the clinic, seeing the familiar faces of her patients, she felt a strange sense of peace. Perhaps this was God's plan for her, she thought. Perhaps he was leading her to something greater, something she couldn't yet see. She returned to the exam room where Mrs. Ramirez was waiting. The old woman looked up at her with concern. "Is everything all right, dear?" Isabelle forced a smile. "Yes, Mrs. Ramirez. Everything will be just fine." But as she packed her belongings and said her goodbyes, Isabelle couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty that loomed over her. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that she would continue to trust in God's plan, whatever it might be. And so, with her head held high and her faith as her guide, Isabelle stepped out of the clinic for the last time, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Part 2. A Journey of Faith. The crisp air of early autumn had begun to settle over the city of Boston, painting the trees in hues of gold and crimson. The streets were alive with the bustle of daily life. Commuters hurrying to work, children laughing as they made their way to school, vendors calling out their wares from sidewalk stalls. But amidst the energy and movement, there was a quieter, less visible current, a current of struggle, of those who had been left behind by the city's prosperity. Isabelle Cartwright walked these streets with a heavy heart but a determined spirit. The events of the past few days had shaken her, and the reality of being jobless had set in. She had spent most of her adult life in that small clinic, dedicating herself to the care of others, and now she was adrift, with no clear direction. But Isabelle was a woman of faith, and she believed that God had a plan for her, even if she couldn't see it yet. As she walked, she observed the faces of the people around her, some hurried and preoccupied, others worn and weary. It was the latter that caught her attention. Isabelle had always been attuned to the suffering of others, and now, with her own future uncertain, she felt even more connected to those who were struggling. The first time she stopped to help, it was almost instinctual. She noticed a man sitting on a bench, his head bowed, his clothes tattered and worn. He had a deep gash on his arm, hastily bandaged with a dirty rag, and Isabelle's heart ached at the sight. Without hesitation, she approached him. "Excuse me, sir," she said gently, crouching down to his level. The man looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and weariness. "My name is Dr. Isabelle Cartwright. May I take a look at your arm?" The man hesitated, clearly unsure of whether to trust her. But something in Isabelle's demeanor, her kind eyes, her soft voice, seemed to reassure him. He nodded slowly, and Isabelle carefully unwrapped the makeshift bandage. The wound was deep and infected, the skin around it red and swollen. "This needs to be cleaned and treated properly," she said, her tone firm but compassionate. "If you don't mind, I can help you with that." The man nodded again, his eyes lowering as if ashamed. Isabelle smiled at him, trying to put him at ease. "You're not alone," she said softly. "Let's get this taken care of." She led him to a nearby park, where she sat him down on a bench. From her bag, which she had instinctively packed with basic medical supplies that morning, she pulled out antiseptic, gauze, and clean bandages. As she worked, she spoke to the man in soothing tones, asking him about his life, his struggles, anything to distract him from the pain. He told her his name was John, that he had lost his job and his home after a series of unfortunate events, a layoff, an eviction, the breakdown of his family. He had been living on the streets for months, surviving day to day, but the infection in his arm had made it increasingly difficult for him to fend for himself. Isabelle listened intently, her heart breaking for him. She finished dressing the wound, then reached into her bag for a sandwich she had brought for herself. "Here," she said, handing it to him. "You need to eat something. It's not much, but it'll help." John took the sandwich, his hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I don't know how to repay you." Isabelle shook her head. "There's no need," she replied. "We all need a little help sometimes." As she stood up to leave, John grabbed her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "You're an angel," he whispered, tears in his eyes. "God bless you." Isabelle squeezed his hand gently. "Take care of yourself, John," she said, "and if you need anything, you can find me here. I'll be around." As she walked away, Isabelle felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since losing her job. Helping John had reminded her of why she had become a doctor in the first place. To make a difference, to bring healing to those who needed it most. And it occurred to her that perhaps this was where she was meant to be. Not confined to a clinic, but out here in the world, meeting people where they were, offering help to those who had no one else. Over the next few days, Isabelle found herself returning to the same areas, seeking out those in need. She treated cuts and bruises, offered advice and comfort, and did whatever she could to ease the suffering of the homeless and the poor. Word began to spread about the kind doctor who helped people on the streets, and soon, more and more people began to seek her out. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Isabelle found herself in a particularly rough part of the city. The buildings were old and dilapidated, the streets littered with trash. It was a place where most people avoided going, especially after dark, but Isabelle felt compelled to be there. As she walked, she noticed a group of people huddled around a small fire in a vacant lot. They looked up as she approached, their expressions a mix of curiosity and caution. Isabelle greeted them warmly, asking if anyone needed medical attention. At first, they were hesitant, but soon, one of the women stepped forward, holding a small child in her arms. "My son," the woman said, her voice trembling. "He's been sick for days, and I don't know what to do." Isabelle took the child in her arms, feeling his forehead. He was burning with fever, his little body weak and listless. "He needs medicine," she said gently. "I can help him, but I'll need to get him to a safe place." The woman looked at Isabelle with desperation in her eyes. "Please," she whispered. "I'll do anything. Just help him." Isabelle nodded, cradling the child close. "I will," she promised. "Let's go." She led the woman and her son to a nearby shelter, where she knew the staff would allow her to treat him. As she worked to bring down the boy's fever, she prayed silently, asking for God's guidance and strength. The night wore on, but Isabelle remained by the child's side, monitoring his condition, administering medicine, and comforting the mother. By morning, the fever had broken. The child was still weak, but he was out of danger. The mother wept with relief, thanking Isabelle over and over again. But Isabelle just smiled, her heart full of gratitude. She knew that this was what she was meant to do, to bring healing and hope to those who had none. As she left the shelter, exhausted but content, Isabelle felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had found her calling, not in a clinic or a hospital, but out here, in the streets, among the people who needed her most. And though she had no job, no steady income, and no security, she knew that she was on the right path. Isabelle continued her work day after day, each encounter reinforcing her faith that this was her purpose. The more she gave, the more she received: supplies, donations, and even offers of help from others who were inspired by her work. It was as if God was providing for her, ensuring that she had everything she needed to continue her mission. But it wasn't just physical healing that Isabelle provided. She also brought comfort to the soul, offering prayers, words of encouragement, and a listening ear to those who had been forgotten by society. She became a familiar face, a source of hope in the darkest corners of the city. And then, one night, as she knelt in prayer, something extraordinary happened. Isabelle had always prayed for guidance, for the strength to continue her work, but this time, she felt a presence, a warmth that filled the room. It was as if God himself was there, speaking directly to her heart. "Build a place where all can find healing in my name," the voice said, clear and gentle. Isabelle's breath caught in her throat. Was this truly God's will for her? Could she, with so little, truly build a clinic of her own? The idea seemed impossible, but the message was unmistakable. Isabelle knew that she had to trust in God's plan, even if she couldn't see how it would come to pass. She didn't know where the money would come from or how she would find the resources, but she believed that if this was God's will, he would provide. And so, with a heart full of faith and a renewed sense of purpose, Isabelle set out on the next chapter of her journey. A journey that would lead her to build a place of healing, not just for the body, but for the soul. Part 3. A Leap of Faith. Isabelle sat in the quiet of her small apartment, the sounds of the bustling city outside a distant murmur. The room was simple, almost sparse. Just a bed, a small table with a few chairs, and a kitchenette tucked into one corner. The walls were bare except for a small cross hanging above the bed, a reminder of the faith that had carried her through so much. The apartment, though modest, was a sanctuary for Isabelle, a place where she could retreat and find solace after long days spent caring for others. But tonight, the stillness of the room felt different. Isabelle had just returned from another day on the streets, tending to the sick and the homeless, her heart full from the encounters she had shared. Yet, as she sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Her thoughts were far from the immediate concerns of her daily work. They were focused instead on the message she had received during prayer, the quiet yet powerful urging to build a place of healing in God's name. The idea of starting her own clinic was both exhilarating and terrifying. Isabelle had always believed in the power of faith, but this felt like a challenge on a different scale, a leap of faith that required more than just trust in God's plan. It required resources, connections, and an unwavering belief in the impossible. And in that moment, alone in her small apartment, Isabelle wasn't sure she had what it took. She glanced around the room, taking in the chipped paint on the walls, the worn furniture, the tiny kitchen that had seen better days. She had barely enough money to pay her rent each month, let alone fund the creation of a clinic. Where would the money come from? How would she find the space, the equipment, the staff? The questions swirled in her mind, each one more daunting than the last. Isabelle took a deep breath and closed her eyes, seeking the peace that came with prayer. "Lord," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, "I want to follow your will, but I don't know how. I'm scared, and I don't know where to start. Please, show me the way." The room was silent. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. But in that silence, Isabelle felt a warmth spread through her chest, a gentle reassurance that she was not alone. The doubts that had been crowding her mind began to recede, replaced by a quiet certainty that if this was truly God's plan, He would provide the means to see it through. With renewed determination, Isabelle began to think more practically about what she needed to do. She knew that she couldn't do this alone. She would need help, and lots of it. But she also knew that she had something powerful on her side: the support of the community she had served so faithfully. Isabelle decided to start by sharing her vision with the people she had helped over the years. She knew many of them by name, knew their stories, their struggles, and their hopes. These were the people who had seen firsthand the impact of her work, who had experienced her care and compassion. If anyone would understand the importance of her mission, it would be them. The next morning, Isabelle set out with a renewed sense of purpose. She visited the shelters, the parks, and the alleys where she had spent so much time, talking to the people she had come to know so well. She spoke of her vision for a clinic, a place where anyone could come for help, no matter their circumstances. A place built on faith, where healing would happen in the name of Jesus Christ. At first, she was met with surprise. The idea seemed so grand, so far beyond anything they had expected. But as Isabelle continued to speak, her passion and conviction began to win them over. People began to nod in agreement, their eyes lighting up with hope. They knew the struggles of life on the streets, the pain of being turned away from places because they couldn't pay. The thought of a clinic where they could receive care without judgment, where they could find not just physical healing but also spiritual support, resonated deeply with them. As word spread, something remarkable began to happen. People started to offer whatever they could to help make Isabelle's dream a reality. Some donated money, small amounts at first, but each one given with a heart full of hope. Others offered their time, their skills, their connections. A local carpenter volunteered to build furniture for the clinic. A retired nurse offered to help with patient care. Even a local restaurant owner promised to provide meals for the patients who came through the doors. The momentum grew, and soon Isabelle found herself at the center of a burgeoning movement. It wasn't just the homeless and the poor who were getting involved. People from all walks of life began to rally around her cause. Church groups, community organizations, and even a few local businesses heard about Isabelle's vision and wanted to contribute. The support was overwhelming, a clear sign to Isabelle that God's hand was guiding this effort. But perhaps the most surprising support came from an old friend Isabelle hadn't seen in years. Sarah Montgomery was a lawyer who had once worked with Isabelle on a pro bono case for a family in need. They had lost touch over the years, but when Sarah heard about what Isabelle was trying to do, she reached out immediately. "Isabelle," Sarah said over the phone, her voice filled with admiration, "what you're doing is incredible. I want to help in any way I can." Isabelle felt a wave of relief wash over her. Sarah was not only a skilled lawyer, but also well-connected in the community. With her help, navigating the legal and financial aspects of establishing a clinic would be much more manageable. They met over coffee the next day, where Sarah laid out a plan to secure the necessary permits, register the clinic as a non-profit, and begin fundraising in earnest. As the days turned into weeks, Isabelle's dream began to take shape. A local philanthropist, moved by her story, donated a plot of land on the outskirts of the city, a perfect location for the clinic. The construction company that had been hired to build the clinic offered to do the work at a fraction of the cost, impressed by the cause and the outpouring of community support. Volunteers flooded in, offering to help with everything from designing the space to painting the walls. Isabelle spent her days overseeing the progress, her heart swelling with gratitude as she watched the clinic rise from the ground. It was hard, exhausting work, but she was sustained by the knowledge that this was where she was meant to be. Every brick laid, every nail hammered, was a testament to the power of faith and community. Isabelle knew that this clinic was not just a building. It was a symbol of hope, a place where people could come to find healing and love. As the construction neared completion, Isabelle turned her attention to the final details. She wanted the clinic to be a welcoming, peaceful place where people could feel safe and cared for. She chose soft, warm colors for the walls, filled the waiting room with comfortable chairs, and made sure that there were plenty of windows to let in natural light. She wanted the clinic to feel like a home, a place where people could find refuge from the hardships of life. But the most important feature, in Isabelle's eyes, was the large wooden cross that would hang above the entrance. She had commissioned a local artist to carve it, and it was a beautiful piece, simple yet powerful. Below the cross, Isabelle had the artist inscribe the words that had become the clinic's guiding principle. Here, all are healed in the name of Jesus Christ. The day the cross was installed, Isabelle stood in front of the clinic, looking up at it with tears in her eyes. This was the culmination of months of hard work, faith, and community support. It was a moment she had never imagined when she first lost her job, but now it felt like the most natural thing in the world. God had led her here, had provided for her every step of the way, and now the clinic was ready to open its doors. As she stood there, a sense of profound peace settled over her. Isabelle knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, difficult days, and moments of doubt, but she also knew that she was on the right path. This clinic, this place of healing, was her calling, and she was ready to serve. With a heart full of gratitude and anticipation, Isabelle turned and walked inside the clinic, ready to welcome the first of many patients who would come seeking healing in the name of Jesus Christ. Part 4. Trials and Triumphs. The grand opening of the clinic was a day filled with anticipation and joy. The small plot of land on the outskirts of Boston had been transformed into a beautiful and welcoming space, a sanctuary of healing and hope. The clinic stood proud, its walls freshly painted in soft, calming colors, the large wooden cross above the entrance a powerful symbol of the faith that had made it all possible. The words inscribed beneath the cross, "Here, all are healed in the name of Jesus Christ," greeted everyone who entered. A reminder that this place was not just about physical healing, but spiritual renewal as well. Isabelle had hardly slept the night before, her mind racing with a mix of excitement and nerves. She had poured her heart and soul into this clinic, and now, as the sun rose on opening day, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The community had come together in a way that she could never have imagined, and the result was nothing short of miraculous. But Isabelle knew that the real work was just beginning. As the doors opened that morning, patients began to stream in. Some were familiar faces, people Isabelle had helped on the streets, who had followed her journey and now came seeking further care. Others were new, drawn by the stories they had heard about the kind doctor who offered help to anyone in need. There was a buzz of activity as the clinic staff, many of whom were volunteers, moved quickly and efficiently to see to everyone. The waiting room was filled with people from all walks of life. Young mothers holding sick children, elderly men and women needing care, and those who had fallen through the cracks of the healthcare system. Isabelle made her way through the room, greeting each patient with a warm smile, her presence bringing comfort and reassurance. Isabelle had assembled a small but dedicated team to help her run the clinic. There was Grace, a nurse who had retired years earlier but had come out of retirement to work alongside Isabelle, inspired by her vision. Grace was a motherly figure, with a gentle touch and a wealth of experience that made her invaluable. Then there was James, a young doctor just out of medical school, eager to learn and full of energy. He had heard about Isabelle's work through a friend and had jumped at the chance to be part of something so meaningful. Together, they formed the heart of the clinic, supported by volunteers who helped with everything from administrative tasks to cleaning and maintaining the building. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Word spread quickly about the new clinic, and soon they were seeing more patients than they had ever anticipated. Isabelle worked long hours, often staying late into the night to ensure that everyone received the care they needed. She performed surgeries, treated chronic illnesses, and even delivered a few babies. There were moments of exhaustion, when the weight of the work seemed almost too much to bear, but Isabelle pushed through, driven by her faith and her commitment to her patients. One of the most rewarding aspects of the clinic was the weekly free clinic day. Every Wednesday, Isabelle and her team opened the doors to anyone who needed care, regardless of their ability to pay. These days were the busiest, with patients lining up outside before dawn, hoping to secure a spot. Isabelle loved these days the most. They were a tangible expression of the clinic's mission, a chance to give back to the community that had given so much to her. One Wednesday, Isabelle met a woman named Maria, who had come to the clinic with her young daughter. The child, no more than 6 years old, was pale and weak, her breathing labored. Maria was clearly terrified, her eyes red from crying. She had tried to take her daughter to other clinics, but without insurance or the ability to pay, she had been turned away. Isabelle knelt down beside the girl, gently brushing the hair from her face. "What's her name?" she asked softly. "Lily," Maria whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, doctor, she's all I have. Please help her." Isabelle felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at the child, who was barely conscious. "We'll do everything we can," she promised, her voice firm. She called for James, and together they moved Lily to one of the exam rooms. The diagnosis was pneumonia, severe and advanced. Lily needed immediate treatment, and Isabelle knew that she might need to be hospitalized. But there was no time to waste. Isabelle and James worked quickly, administering antibiotics, fluids, and oxygen. Hours passed in a blur of activity, but finally, by the grace of God, Lily's condition began to stabilize. Her breathing eased, and color slowly returned to her cheeks. Maria sat by her daughter's side the entire time, clutching her tiny hand, her eyes never leaving Isabelle's face. When it became clear that Lily would recover, Maria broke down in tears, overwhelmed with relief. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you so much. You've saved her life." Isabelle placed a hand on Maria's shoulder, her own eyes glistening with emotion. "It's not me you should thank," she said gently. "It's God. He's the one who guides us, who gives us the strength to do this work." Maria nodded, her tears still flowing. "I've never been a religious person," she admitted, her voice choked with emotion. "But seeing what you've done here, how you care for people, I think maybe I need to believe in something bigger than myself." Isabelle smiled warmly. "Faith is a journey," she said, "and it's never too late to start. We're just here to help along the way." As the weeks turned into months, the clinic continued to thrive. They faced challenges, of course, unexpected expenses, supply shortages, and the sheer volume of patients that sometimes overwhelmed them. But each time a problem arose, the community rallied around them, offering help, donations, and prayers. Isabelle knew that this was more than just a clinic. It was a testament to what could be achieved when people came together in faith and love. However, not everyone was pleased with the success of the clinic. Dr. Malcolm Grant, Isabelle's former employer, had been watching from the sidelines with growing anger and resentment. His own clinic had struggled in recent months, losing patients to Isabelle's new venture. The success of her clinic was a constant reminder of his failure, and the knowledge that she had done it all without him only fueled his bitterness. Dr. Grant began to spread rumors, telling anyone who would listen that Isabelle's clinic was unsafe, that she was exploiting the poor for personal gain. He even went so far as to accuse her of practicing medicine without proper credentials, hoping to discredit her in the eyes of the community. But his attempts to undermine her only strengthened the resolve of those who knew the truth. One day, as Isabelle was finishing up with a patient, she received a visit from Sarah Montgomery, the lawyer who had been instrumental in helping her set up the clinic. Sarah's expression was serious as she walked into Isabelle's office, closing the door behind her. "Isabelle, we need to talk," Sarah said, her tone somber. Isabelle looked up from her desk, concern etched on her face. "What is it, Sarah? Is something wrong?" Sarah nodded, taking a seat across from Isabelle. "It's Dr. Grant," she began. "He's been making some serious accusations against you and the clinic. I've been hearing whispers about it for weeks, but now he's taken it to the next level. He's filed a formal complaint with the medical board, claiming that you're practicing without a license and that the clinic is operating illegally." Isabelle's heart sank. She had expected resistance, even hostility, from Dr. Grant, but this was far beyond what she had anticipated. The thought of losing the clinic, of everything she had worked so hard to build, was almost too much to bear. "What can we do?" Isabelle asked, her voice trembling slightly. Sarah leaned forward, her expression determined. "Don't worry, Isabelle. I'm not going to let him destroy what you've built. We'll fight this. I've already started gathering evidence to refute his claims. We have plenty of people willing to testify on your behalf. Patients, volunteers, even other doctors. We're going to prove that his accusations are baseless." Isabelle nodded, trying to steady her nerves. "Thank you, Sarah. I don't know what I'd do without you." Sarah smiled reassuringly. "You don't have to do this alone, Isabelle. We're all in this together. And remember, you're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for everyone who depends on this clinic." The days that followed were some of the most challenging Isabelle had ever faced. The investigation into the clinic put immense pressure on her and her team. There were inspections, interviews, and endless paperwork to fill out. But through it all, Isabelle held on to her faith, believing that the truth would prevail. And it did. After weeks of scrutiny, the medical board found no evidence to support Dr. Grant's claims. The clinic was cleared of all accusations, and Dr. Grant's reputation suffered a severe blow. The community, outraged by his attempts to sabotage Isabelle, rallied around her even more strongly, solidifying the clinic's place as a beacon of hope in the city. Isabelle knew that this victory was not just hers. It belonged to everyone who had supported her, who had believed in her vision. It was a testament to the power of faith, of perseverance, and of the incredible things that could be achieved when people work together for a common good. And so, as the clinic continued to grow and thrive, Isabelle felt a deep sense of gratitude. The trials she had faced had only strengthened her resolve, and she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would meet them with the same unwavering faith that had brought her this far. The clinic was not just a place of healing. It was a living, breathing testament to the power of love, community, and God's grace. Part 5. A Legacy of Healing. 4 years had passed since Isabelle Cartwright first opened the doors to her small clinic, and in that time, her vision had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. What had started as a modest facility on the outskirts of Boston had blossomed into a large, bustling hospital, a beacon of hope and healing that served the entire community. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous, a testament to the power of faith, perseverance, and the support of those who believed in Isabelle's mission. The hospital now stood as a prominent structure, its modern design a blend of functionality and warmth. Large windows lined the exterior, allowing natural light to flood the interior spaces, creating an atmosphere of openness and serenity. The cross that had once hung above the entrance of the clinic now adorned the hospital's main atrium, a beautiful centerpiece that reminded all who entered that this was a place where healing occurred in the name of Jesus Christ. Beneath it, the words, "Here, all are healed in the name of Jesus Christ," were inscribed, just as they had been in the original clinic. Inside, the hospital was a hive of activity. The waiting rooms were spacious and comfortable, filled with the sounds of quiet conversations and the occasional laughter of children. The walls were adorned with artwork created by local artists, depicting scenes of hope and healing, further enhancing the welcoming environment. Isabelle had insisted on these touches, believing that the hospital should be a place where people felt cared for from the moment they walked through the doors. The hospital was now staffed with a full team of doctors, nurses, and specialists, many of whom had been drawn to the hospital by its unique mission. Isabelle had managed to attract some of the best medical professionals in the region, individuals who shared her commitment to providing compassionate care to everyone, regardless of their ability to pay. The staff worked tirelessly, their dedication reflected in the high standard of care that the hospital had become known for. Isabelle herself had become a well-respected figure in the medical community, though she remained humble and grounded. She continued to work long hours, often taking on the most challenging cases, her presence a source of comfort and inspiration to both patients and staff. Despite the hospital's growth, Isabelle had never lost sight of her original mission. She made sure that the hospital maintained the same spirit of generosity and compassion that had defined her small clinic. Every Wednesday, the hospital continued the tradition of offering free medical care to those in need. These days were among the busiest, with people from all over the city, and sometimes even beyond, coming to receive treatment. The hospital's reputation for providing excellent care without discrimination had spread far and wide, and people knew that if they came to Isabelle's hospital, they would be treated with dignity and respect. One Wednesday, Isabelle was walking through the hospital's corridors, checking on patients and speaking with staff, when she was approached by a nurse. "Dr. Cartwright," the nurse said, her voice filled with urgency, "there's a man in the ER who's asking for you. He's in pretty bad shape." Isabelle's brow furrowed with concern. "What's his condition?" The nurse hesitated. "He's been severely beaten. Broken ribs, lacerations, possible internal bleeding. But that's not all. He's also showing signs of malnutrition and dehydration. He's been on the streets for a long time, I'd guess." Isabelle nodded, her heart heavy. "Take me to him." When Isabelle entered the ER, she saw the man lying on a gurney, his face battered and bruised, his body gaunt and frail. Despite his injuries, there was something familiar about him. She approached the gurney, her voice soft as she spoke to him. "Sir, I'm Dr. Cartwright. We're going to take care of you." The man's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, he struggled to focus on her face. Then, recognition flickered in his gaze, and his lips moved as he tried to speak. Isabelle leaned in closer to hear him. "Isabelle," he rasped, his voice weak. Isabelle's breath caught in her throat as she realized who he was. "Dr. Grant," she whispered, barely able to believe it. Malcolm Grant, her former employer and the man who had once tried to destroy everything she had built, lay before her, broken and defeated. His eyes were sunken, his body emaciated, and his once sharp features had softened with the weight of suffering. Isabelle felt a wave of conflicting emotions, shock, pity, and a deep sadness for the man he had become. "Isabelle," he croaked again, his voice filled with pain and desperation. "Help me, please." Isabelle's heart ached at the sight of him. Despite everything he had done to her, she couldn't turn him away. Her faith, her compassion, wouldn't allow it. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her voice steady. "You're in good hands, Dr. Grant. We'll take care of you." Isabelle quickly ordered the necessary treatments, her medical instincts taking over as she worked to stabilize him. As she did, memories of their past encounters flooded her mind. The anger, the betrayal, the lengths he had gone to in order to discredit her. But those memories were overshadowed by the man lying before her, a man who had fallen so far from the position of power he once held. After hours of treatment, Dr. Grant's condition began to stabilize. He was moved to a private room, where he would receive ongoing care. Isabelle stayed by his side, monitoring his progress, but also reflecting on the journey that had brought them both to this moment. She knew that this was a test of her faith and compassion, a moment where she had to choose between holding on to past grievances or extending the same grace and forgiveness that she preached. Over the next few days, Dr. Grant's strength slowly returned, though he remained weak and bedridden. Isabelle visited him daily, checking his vitals, adjusting his treatment plan, and offering words of encouragement. At first, he was too weak to speak much, but as his strength improved, so did his desire to talk. One afternoon, as Isabelle sat by his bedside, Dr. Grant looked at her with a mixture of regret and gratitude. "Isabelle," he said, his voice still hoarse, "I don't deserve your kindness. After everything I did to you, I tried to destroy you, your clinic, but you saved my life." Isabelle looked at him, her expression gentle but firm. "Dr. Grant, we all make mistakes. We all fall short. But that doesn't mean we're beyond redemption. My faith teaches me to forgive, to offer grace, just as grace has been offered to me." Dr. Grant's eyes filled with tears, the weight of his guilt finally breaking through. "I was so blinded by greed, by my own arrogance. I lost everything because of it. And now, here I am, at your mercy." Isabelle reached out and took his hand, her grip warm and reassuring. "You're not at my mercy, Dr. Grant. You're in God's hands, and He's not done with you yet." Dr. Grant closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I don't know how to make amends for all the harm I've caused." Isabelle squeezed his hand gently. "The first step is to forgive yourself and to ask for forgiveness. And then, take it one day at a time. Start by being kind to yourself and others. It's never too late to change." The days turned into weeks, and Dr. Grant's condition continued to improve. He remained in the hospital, receiving the care and rehabilitation he needed. During this time, he and Isabelle spoke often, their conversations ranging from the medical field to faith and forgiveness. It was clear that Dr. Grant was a changed man, humbled by his experience and deeply remorseful for his past actions. As he prepared to leave the hospital, Dr. Grant made a surprising request. "Isabelle," he began, his voice hesitant, "I know I don't have any right to ask this, but I'd like to stay here, at the hospital. Not as a doctor. I know I'm not fit for that anymore, but maybe I could help in other ways. I want to give back, to make amends." Isabelle smiled, her heart swelling with pride and compassion. "We would be glad to have you, Dr. Grant. Everyone deserves a second chance." And so, Malcolm Grant became a part of the hospital community, working in various capacities to support the staff and patients. He assisted with administrative tasks, mentored younger medical professionals, and even became a patient advocate, using his experiences to help others navigate the healthcare system. His presence was a daily reminder of the power of forgiveness and the possibility of redemption. As the hospital continued to grow and thrive, Isabelle reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She had faced numerous challenges, losing her job, starting a clinic from nothing, battling false accusations. But through it all, she had remained steadfast in her faith and her commitment to helping others. The hospital was not just a place of healing for the body. It was a sanctuary for the soul, a place where people found hope, love, and grace. For years had passed since that fateful day when Isabelle was fired from Dr. Grant's clinic, and now, as she walked through the halls of her own hospital, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had created something lasting, something that would continue to help others long after she was gone. The hospital was her legacy, a testament to the power of faith, community, and the belief that with God, all things are possible. As Isabelle paused in front of the cross in the atrium, she said a silent prayer of thanks. The words inscribed beneath it, "Here, all are healed in the name of Jesus Christ," had never felt more true. This was a place where lives were changed, where people found not just medical care, but the love and compassion of Christ. With a heart full of gratitude, Isabelle continued her rounds, greeting patients and staff, offering words of encouragement and hope. She knew that the journey was far from over, but she also knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The hospital was thriving, and its mission was clear: to bring healing, hope, and faith to all who entered its doors. And in that knowledge, Isabelle found peace, knowing that she had fulfilled her purpose and that the work she had started would continue to bless others for generations to come. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below to share your thoughts and experiences. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, God bless you.